morning and welcome. We are glad you're joining us today to talk about telematics. My name is Sarah Brown. I'm Executive Vice President of Marketing at floLIVE, and I will be your host and moderator today. I think let's give it a couple more minutes for people to join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 2 minutes after the hour. I'm sure people will continue to join, but out of respect for everyone's time, thank you again for joining. My name is Sarah Brown. I'm Executive Vice President of Marketing at floLIVE, and we today are going to talk about the connectivity implications of what's happening in the telematics space. So first, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. My colleague, Curtis Govan, President of the Americas here at floLIVE. And we also have two really intelligent analysts joining us, Lizzie Stokes to talk about connectivity, and Adhish Luitel, Adhish, who is going to talk all about telematics and all the exciting things that are happening in that space.
Morning,
so
Sarah.
Adhish, I will start with you to tell us a little bit about ABI.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So let me just start off by giving a brief intro on ABI Research. So we're basically a tech intelligence company where we churn out a lot of syndicated reports, your market sizing reports, benchmarking reports, application analysis reports as well, looking at different markets ranging from fleet management, supply chain to manufacturing, augmented reality, automotive, and consumer tech. And I think what makes us unique is we take a deep dive into technologies provided by vendors, as well as look into their implementations aspects, such as their time to value, their go-to marketing strategy, and their ROI that they can provide. So we sit nicely between the technology and the market side of things. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Curtis, will you give us a quick intro to floLIVE?
Yeah, certainly, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Glad to join you this morning. If you look at floLIVE holistically, we are an IoT company that owns its technology. And if you look there to the right, it's our core network there. That's a full stack 3GPP core, connectivity management platform, multi-MZR. Those are really the fundamental components. And we take this technology that we design, we build, we manage it ourselves, all by floLIVE engineers. We used it to build a connectivity solution that really solves what we think are the two fundamental toughest problems in IoT connectivity. Those problems are high availability and high performance from a network perspective, first of all, and then operational efficiency. When we look at scale, operational efficiency is absolutely mandatory. If you go back to high availability, it really starts with coverage. We've said in the industry, I've said in the industry, and many have said for years that coverage is king. We've integrated our core network, our carrier grade core network with over 27 MNOs around the world. with 40 plus globally distributed POPs, right? So that's coverage everywhere. It gives us the best possible coverage around the world with redundancy in virtually every market in the world, and expanded coverage with the satellite solution that you see with Release 17 NB-IoT over satellite. If you look, then in addition to that, we've deployed the core network in various regions. Because it's in various regions, we're able to offer solutions like lower latency that we'll see later, how it impacts telematics solution there. In several countries, in every region, we have that locally distributed core network, so we can have the lowest latency possible in that region with the ability to expand if necessary in those regions. From an operational efficiency perspective, like every business anywhere, if you're looking at scale, operational efficiency is one of the key things. When we look at IoT and the legacy, and you look at multiple MNO agreements, multiple SIM SKUs, and then the different platforms across the operators, it's just far too complex, right? So we just know that that simply doesn't support scale. And from our perspective, what we do is we deploy it everywhere exactly the same, right? With very few exceptions. I will say Turkey is an exception, but you know, we've had separate webinars on that Turkey is a separate, but we deploy the core network everywhere simply the same. So you have the single connectivity management platform for global consistency. And all of this can be accessed with a single SIM SKU using our patented multi-MZ technology that can be deployed in a standard EUICC or with a profile for either both a consumer EUICC or an M2M EUICC, and soon to be the SGP 32 standard there will also have that available. So you look at everything all combined into a single platform, single SKU, deployed all over the world for global consistency, for redundancy, for being able to meet individual requirements for applications, particularly for telematics. As you look at the use cases, we get into that, I think you'll see that from a floLIVE perspective, our global connectivity solution, it really uniquely solves the problem for telematics and other use cases. So with that, I'll pass it over to Adhish.
Yep, thank you, Curtis. So just to start off, let's just start by talking about the state of fleet management right now and how that's evolving. The fleet management industry is definitely having its golden era of digital transformation, where we're sort of seeing a lot of the evolution of use cases from traditional track and trace use cases to a lot of the advanced IoT applications. And as you can see on the bullets, like some of the major ones are video surveillance based, calling for driver fatigue monitoring, driver behavior monitoring, road condition monitoring, video surveillance for video and cargo, vehicle and cargo safety as well, using data to make considerations for fleet electrification as well, kind of really collecting the data points to understand, okay, what's the fuel consumption for some of our vehicles like are like who are on the end of their vehicle life cycle. So those are some of the things that you can do. Also, autonomous driving, that's a major use case that's coming up. And these new use cases will definitely demand for advanced IoT sensors, AI-enabled dash cameras, uh, driver behavior monitoring technologies, edge AI, cloud data management, and new connectivity management platforms. And more importantly, like all these new applications will demand higher bandwidth and improved connectivity. As you know, if you're doing AI on the edge using AI-enabled dash cams, you would need a high-powered 4G or even 5G network. And if it's a hard-to-reach area, you might need satellite. So there are a lot of considerations that need to be made as you're evolving from track and trace use cases to a lot of these video-based use cases. And the main question really is right now, are fleet manager prepared for this? And it's a bit of a yes and a no question answer, because a lot of the fleet managers are still relying on manual processes, even your manual, really legacy TMS solutions, really old telematics systems, and prominent use cases are still track and trace, which don't need a lot of bandwidth. However, having said that, there are a lot of education being done in the market, and we have done a lot of surveys to kind of take a better look at the fleet management markets, especially in North America, across a range of verticals. And we can definitely see that fleet managers are slowly starting to see how use cases like driver behavior monitoring, assessing their fatigue, and training them accordingly or checking in with them can be a great low-hanging fruit to improve driver morale. And this sort of lines up with market demands as well as, North America, the trucking industry, as you can see in the recent news as well, they are really starting to focus on driver retention and reducing turnover. So to sort of prepare for this future, managers will need to adjust their platforming and their sensor technologies. And I would say more importantly, look at an advanced connectivity provider that can sort of meet that, latency, power efficiency, and coverage needs of this evolving fleet management market. Now let's move on to kind of talking about some of the traditional use cases that have been around for decades now, really. Like I mentioned before, like fleet managers definitely depend on a traditional range of use cases as well as traditional technologies to really track their fleets as well as drivers. And this slides list a few of them. So the prominent one, like I mentioned before, is track and trace, basically using GPS monitoring of vehicles and assets. I think that's probably the most important use case. That's really the underlying to telematics as well in general. And it really allows for granular visibility into a vehicle's individual components. And it's definitely a building block for a lot of the future or current use cases as well. And one of the drivers for this has been regulatory compliance. It has been a really important use case as well for, fleet managers who, by federal or state law, must log in vehicle maintenance logs, driver hours, load waste, and things like that. And this has especially been, important in the US and Canada due to ELD mandates. Similarly, condition-based monitoring is important for, food and beverage and pharma verticals, chemicals as well. Food supply chains have extra reporting obligations from January 2026 due to FISMA compliance, for example, where you need to track certain, key data elements for the food supply chain at different points, basically, when you're going from farm to table. Similarly, in pharma, there are a lot of traceability requirements as well. Supply chains have to comply by the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, for example. So, in order to kind of adhere to all these regulatory requirements as well, many fleet managers have started automating their reporting processes with sensors and fleet management platforms, especially in cold chains as well. And of course, asset tracking and protection is key for fleet management as well. Not just your vehicles, your trailers, your assets within the yard as well. So having GPS and condition-based monitoring sensors in your trucks or your refrigerated vans or reefers to protect and kind of track your assets is definitely a fundamental use case. And having said that, like all these use cases are extremely important, but also represent, the building blocks for new use cases as well that will definitely require more bandwidth. And they feature less demanding connectivity. They mostly rely on LPWA or LTE-M or NB-IoT network to send back fleet data to managers. Now let's talk about some of the emerging use cases that we're seeing in this space. So yeah, you can see on the slide that these use cases require more advanced connectivity and technology rather than your traditional use cases, and we are seeing a lot of traction among these use cases as well. The most impactful and the one that really resonates with a lot of fleets globally would be video surveillance. And the two main use cases for surveillance that we're seeing in the market right now are asset monitoring and driver safety monitoring. Asset loading use cases basically use cameras to monitor employees as they load and unload cargo from the vehicle to the trailer. And this can be important for food supply chains as well, especially when you're carrying a lot of perishables and you need to load it at a right time. So fleet managers can track this in real time through video solutions. The other one is driver safety, really looking into drivers' behaviors and kind of monitoring them in the cab and also monitoring them through roadside cameras as well. This can make for cost savings when it comes to insurance claims as well. And kind of taking a more forward-looking approach, like distracted driving and driver fatigue detection and training them accordingly requires very high bandwidth because you're collecting a lot of data to kind of monitor every asset of whatever a driver is doing. Like some of the older ones where whether they're smoking on the road, they or whether their seat belts are strapped on, whether they're pulling out their phones while they're driving or not. But now, like a lot of the things are revolving around drowsiness detection as well. Basically, kind of monitoring things like whether they're yawning or not, whether their eyelids are blinking a lot or not, to deduce the fact that okay, maybe the drivers are tired right now. And this will definitely require a lot more bandwidth and requires higher AI on the edge as well. And they will need to be empowered by gateway technology fused with 4G or 5G networks in the future as well. And video surveillance are definitely best examples of how fleet management industry is growing, and you definitely need a lower latency connectivity compared to LPWA networks as well. The other use case is business process integration, and this is definitely best explained through yard management. So managers have historically had to use manual process to manage their yards, their gate check-in process, whether a truck is coming into a yard or not, whether they're loading correctly or not. But with better GPS technology, more advanced IoT sensors, and LPWA and 4G networks, vehicles can alert yard managers of their movements. Like there's automated kiosks for drivers to just check in when they come into the yards or not. And they kind of loop in with WMS or TMS platforms as well to let them know about possible delays in shipments as well. And this sort of communication once again requires low latency as well as real-time insights into the vehicle's location, kind of notifying them of any potential weather-based delays, any real-time tracking of assets within the yard as well, any traffic, based signals as well. So yeah, this is a very emerging use case that will accelerate connectivity requirements as well among a lot of the trucking providers as well. And lastly, the other emerging use case is vehicle theft protection. So according to one report that we saw, over 1 million cars in the US were stolen just last year. And advanced real-time technology like advanced GPS sensors coupled with geofencing can prevent theft within the fleets. And as fleet managers are wanting to protect their assets in real time, highly available location information would require more reliable connectivity. So yeah, let's move on to talking about the future use cases now. So yeah, I mean, and some of the use cases here would be what I would like to call the coming wave of, emerging use cases basically. And these use cases, some of them are definitely more closer to reality than others, and they'll definitely need an unprecedented level of connectivity as well as technology coordination. And the first is probably the most realized among some of the future use cases that you can see. As you can see on the chart on the left, commercial fleets are expected to quickly transition their fleets to EVs, and we are starting to see this movement as due to a lot of incentives from the government as well as a lower cost of ownership among EV fleets. So we are expected to see nearly 3 million EVs deployed globally by 2030. And yeah, this is due to all the regulations, all the incentives, as well as that contributes to a lower cost of ownership, basically. And before making the switch, fleet managers are really collecting this vast amount of data about their gasoline consumptions to better understand their mileage, their fuel consumption, to kind of anticipate how things will change with EVs and how they can lower their total cost of ownership. And this level of data collection will definitely require more advanced cloud platforms for better analytics. Secondly, autonomous driving will create more connectivity and technology demands on fleet management. We're seeing a lot of cases of level 1 and 2 automations, which is basically capabilities like automated steering, which definitely already requires a lot more complex coordination among other sensors, vehicle video technology as well, and computing technology. So as advanced level of automation goes, human intervention won't be necessary. But then again, like this will require a next level of data transmission and ultra reliable connectivity. And the last use case is probably the most far off use case, but that's definitely emerging as well. That would be V2X. So V2X means vehicle to everything. So it means having vehicle communicate with everything on the road, like other vehicle or anything to do with a road infrastructure that revolves around IoT technology. And this type of communication is, again, this depends on a large amount of connected things, all of which should be sharing the same network protocol. So that means that V2X will require a highly available, a highly powered network like a 4G or 5G that can offer very low latency and highly available connectivity as well. So just to kind of bring it all home, next slide, please, Sarah. Yeah, so basically the moral of the technology is as fleet management use cases evolve from basic track and trace to very advanced video-based use cases, electrification considerations, V2X, connectivity requirements will grow as well. So I'll hand it over to Lizzie now to kind of discuss the ways in which different connectivity technologies and connectivity providers can cater to those demands.
Thanks, Adhish. Hi, everyone. As Sarah mentioned at the top of the call, my name is Lizzie, and I'll be leading us through some slides about connectivity requirements in the future of fleet management. So like Adhish alluded to, future fleet management applications will result in a massive increase in sensor data. Funneling that data from vehicle gateways to cloud applications will require hyper-reliable connectivity, especially in advanced use cases like autonomous driving and V2X. To prepare for this future, fleet managers will look for connectivity providers that can offer both low latency communications and a platform that is designed for these new use cases. So all of this to say, connectivity will be king in the future of fleet management, and some traditional connectivity practices will no longer serve this market as it quickly evolves. Let's take, for example, the traditional connectivity supplier, MNOs. While they obviously have a very impressive history catering to connectivity needs, they can also be geographically limited, which might affect fleet managers who are looking to execute on these new future applications. The advanced use cases that Adhish led us through have intense low latency requirements that will require a new type of connectivity provider that can provide localized connectivity, but globally. So we will explore some of these new requirements in the next few slides. First, we will explore what types of networks fleet managers are using and which they will use in the future. As mentioned by Adhish, LPWA networks like LTE-M and NB-IoT are cost-effective choices for low data use cases like asset tracking or remote monitoring. 4G is mostly used for emerging use cases that have more mission-critical characteristics and higher throughput needs. So these would be like video-based use cases like driver safety monitoring or fuel management. 4G's availability and its performance lends itself well to these types of applications. And what about 5G? Advanced applications that are considered maybe far off, like V2X, will likely rely on widespread, high-throughput networks like 5G. However, its inconsistent rollout and its slow uptake has limited its current use in fleet management use cases, particularly in the ones that would require consistent cross-country or cross-border coverage. 5G's current uneven rollout is another reason that fleet managers could benefit from a connectivity service provider like an MVNO or another service provider that can aggregate available 5G networks together to maximize that coverage and make those networks appear to be less fractured. As you can see here, satellite is also a growing possibility for fleet managers. It can serve as fallback to cellular and remote locations that often lack cellular coverage. So it's particularly useful in applications like rail or maritime container tracking. Okay, we go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide here explores the SIM options that will likely play a big role in the future of fleet management. So as most people on this call probably know, commercial fleets often travel through different areas with varying levels of cellular coverage. They can traverse through rural areas, cities, across borders, often entering and exiting areas with different national operators and varying levels of 4G, 5G, and LPWA coverage. So this means that fleet management use cases, maybe more so than other IoT markets, work well with a partner like an MVNO or another type of service provider that can aggregate different network types on a single SIM. This is particularly helpful as these future fleet management use cases will require uninterrupted connectivity no matter the area or the country. So there are two SIM options here for fleet managers to achieve this consistent coverage. The first is eSIM, or as you can see here, standard EUICC. As many on this call also know, eSIM allows customers to remotely provision SIM cards after the point of manufacturing. This means that customers can provision devices with new carrier profiles over the air and remotely. This frees customers from having to physically swap SIMs, which would be impossible for many fleet managers anyways, and allows users to change their coverage depending on their needs. This is particularly helpful for fleets given that they have really dynamic connectivity needs depending on where the fleet is going. This can also eliminate roaming by allowing localized connectivity profiles, which is important in certain countries like Turkey and Brazil that might have roaming restrictions. The advanced EUICC with multi-MZ approach is very similar. The advanced EUICC with multi-MZ solution is managed by a single connectivity provider, which has relationships with multiple MNOs who can each provide their own international mobile subscriber identity, or MZ. These MZs are then held in a single SIM, and when devices need additional coverage, more profiles can be pushed over the air. Both approaches supply dynamic connectivity and have the goal of uninterrupted coverage, which is what many future fleet managers will need to address these new emerging use cases. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as we've discussed, future fleet managers will require a connectivity management platform with features and functionalities that can handle the complexities of these future applications. There are several approaches to buying connectivity in CMPs, some of which are just briefly explored on this slide. Customers can, of course, purchase connectivity and a CMP from an MNO. MNOs, like I mentioned before, clearly have extensive experience providing connectivity to a range of different customers and verticals, and many fleet managers buy MNO connectivity and CMP bundles because of this experience and their reputation. This may be a good option for fleets that are expected to stay in the home country of their MNO supplier. However, as previously mentioned on the first slide of this segment, MNOs can be geographically limited. They do not typically have roaming agreements with other operators domestically, and so a customer would therefore be locked into their coverage in any domestic area. And if these operators do have roaming partnerships with international operators, it can be difficult for customers to achieve the same platform functionality if operating on that international partner's network. So these consequences might not mean much in other IoT markets, but they can have implications for fleets that often rely on really seamless international connectivity and platform functions. Customers can also buy a connectivity solution and a CMP from an MVNO. As connectivity resellers, MVNOs aggregate many different network types on a single SIM, which is likely to be an eSIM now or an EUICC SIM. Unlike an MNO, MVNOs can provide international connectivity without roaming fees or really complex partnerships, and can provide uniform platforming experiences across all these different types of carrier networks. So saying all that, MVNOs are obviously a great option for fleet managers, but in order to prepare for the future of fleet management, many MVNOs will have to establish a unique global presence to build truly low latency communications. So this is where we would say the next generation of connectivity providers will come in. These providers will likely establish a maximum number of points of presence or POPs to provide more localized connectivity around the world. The benefits of such local connectivity is twofold. It lowers latency, which will need to happen in order for a connectivity provider to support these future fleet management use cases. And this lower latency also helps devices preserve their battery life, particularly when compared to roaming. This benefit is especially important for low power use cases and fleet management. So just in conclusion, fleet management, like Adhish said, is evolving from traditional track and trace use cases to really complex future applications. This transition will result in intense connectivity needs. And as fleet managers look to the future, they will require a connectivity provider that can support both uninterrupted, low latency communications and advanced platforming needs. So with that, I'll hand it off to Curtis to speak a bit more about floLIVE.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Yeah.
I think it's a good review of the use cases, and I think kind of going into the next section there, obviously from a floLIVE perspective, we believe we're that next generation of connectivity and platform. The reason why is because I think we take a different approach. We've taken a different approach, and we own the technology, so it allows us to do things that are not normal. And I many times speak to our customers about really a paradigm shift when you own the core network infrastructure there and you own the pieces there. When we look at advanced connectivity, like we don't take the advance lightly. It doesn't mean that we provide a generic solution. It means that we deliver something that is specifically based on a deep understanding of telematic customer needs. And we get those needs and understanding those requirements from talking to customers, from working with partners like ABI, so we fully understand what's going on, what the requirements are in the market. Then uniquely, we use our ownership of the core network and the various connectivity integrations that we have around the world to give us the flexibility to optimize a solution that's based on specific requirements and use cases. Like, this is unprecedented in the industry. It's not something you can get from an MNO. It's not something you can get from many MVNOs who are really just using the core network from the MNO. It's something that we can uniquely provide. When it comes to latency that you mentioned, Lizzie and Adhish mentioned the same. When it comes to use cases like they need higher throughput that we're going to see with autonomous vehicles and ultra low latency there, where you need the redundancy within the network, when you need global compliance there for particular locations where data has to be in a specific location, or you need that some sort of performance requirement there, or recovery, or you need the always on connectivity. I think you called it hyper reliable connectivity, Lizzie. Like, those requirements can uniquely be provided by floLIVE. We're talking about redundancy from a network perspective, with the combination of the SIM technology, the platform that's all real time, including the billing and management of the data usage there, all happens in real time. It allows us to uniquely support the variety of things that we have there. In addition to that, we mentioned the different technologies. Technology is evolving. We're evolving with the technology and optimizing the network to meet every piece of the optimization that's required, whether it's from the legacy 2G, 3 networks that are gradually getting sunset, but they're still available now, to the more advanced technology that we see with 4G, with CAT-M, NB-IoT over satellite. Cat 1 bis is in our conversations now, 5G RedCap. All of these are fully supported by the floLIVE technology. And I mentioned earlier things like SGP32, where we're evolving the standard for EUICC. All of these are really supported within the floLIVE technology suite, so that we can optimize solutions across the board, particularly for telematics, but really across all of the IoT applications there. Uniquely positions us to do that. So, we're happy that we've had a good conversation today. And thank you to our audience, and thank you to Lizzie and Adhish for some really good use cases that we personally see all the day, every day. And these are the kind of use cases that we're working to solve now, for the ones that are pleasant, but also for the ones that are coming up for the future. I will say the two that are very interesting for us that we're mentioning, the autonomous vehicles there. I think those unique requirements that are going to come there, because that vehicle, when we talk about hyper reliable, you absolutely, in an autonomous world, we're going to need a reliable networks there that are always available with redundancy, with a non-standard core network infrastructure that you have today. I think that area in particular is going to have a need for dedicated core networks like we can provide for individual customers. So they don't have things like maintenance occur in the middle of the night when they're trying to do updates, or when someone's actually driving the vehicle and they need to have control. So yeah, I think it was a great conversation today. Again, thank you to our audience, and thank you to Lizzie and Adhish.
So now I'm going to open the floor for questions. Those of you who are participating, I believe you have a Q&A button in your control bar at the bottom of your screen. If you want to submit questions, I will be happy to relay them to our panelists. But first, I have some questions of my own, of course. So we've talked a lot about latency and the need for low latency. With today's networks, what kind of latency is to be expected on when you're dealing with global deployments?
I'll take that, Sarah, because this is one that comes up frequently. I mentioned earlier scale. So if you look at what's happened with scale, particularly for telematics, aggregators have said, MNOs have said, like, here's a single SIM, you can use it all over the world. Great. So now you have something that you can take. It reduces the SIM SKU to one SIM SKU, but the sacrifice there has been latency and performance, and in particular for devices that are battery operated. So if you look at latency from that perspective outside of your home country, you're looking anywhere between 300 to 500 milliseconds of latency, right? If you look at what we do to reduce that by localizing the core network, dropping that down to 100 milliseconds, now you put that into your battery life calculator and say, look, if I save anywhere between 200 to 400 milliseconds per message transaction, and we're talking about round trip delay, it becomes very material for battery life saving for those type of solutions there. So that's why the localization piece really comes into play, where we can provide localization in region and country with a single SKU. That kind of goes to the next level of supporting those applications.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. Lizzie, I have a question for you. We're talking about some of these emerging and future application sets and the need for high bandwidth, low latency connectivity. Will there still be a role for LPWA to play as these technologies advance?
Yeah, I think so. I know we both focused a lot on high bandwidth and 4G and 5G and some of those really high intense connectivity requirements, but there will obviously still be low data use cases in fleet management, like condition-based monitoring, asset tracking. Those sorts of things will still require, or won't require the performance necessarily of a 4G or 5G network. And it will still be the most cost-effective choice, I would say, to use an LPWA network for those kind of low data applications that will definitely still exist, even as we kind of evolve into those higher throughput applications.
Do you see the vehicle ultimately being like a system of systems? And how do you, and maybe this is for you, Adhish, how do you manage, always choosing the best fit and or lowest cost connectivity when you have so many different applications around the vehicle?
Yeah, I'll let Adhish kind of answer the system to a system question, but just in terms of managing those networks and managing the correct network for the correct use case, I think that's when having a connectivity provider that can really help you choose which use case necessitates which network and really help you, and then in a platform manage all of those different connections. So I think, this is the reason why I mentioned that having an MVNO would be a great option for a fleet manager, is because they have access to these different types of networks, LPWA through 5G, and they have experience kind of connecting all of those dots. So I think really that's where having a really good connectivity provider comes in.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think it really depends on the type of telematics provider a fleet can go with. Let's say I just go with a fleet telematics provider for a track and trace plus engine diagnostic analysis, right? Chances are, if I need condition-based monitoring or something like a video surveillance, I'll stick to that telematics provider because I don't want to deal with a lot of sensors. So yeah, it really depends on a case-to-case basis, and different fleets definitely have different needs. But I think that's the biggest trend that we see. Typically, for end users, if they opt with the telematics provider, they will choose to kind of stick with them unless they're not entirely satisfied with them.
Okay. You had spoken a little bit, Adhish, about the emergence of commercial EVs. And you mentioned that EV fleets have a lower total cost of ownership than
Yep.
gas-powered fleets. Can you expand a little more on that?
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of take a control tower approach to this as well, TCO, total cost of ownership, it's basically a financial estimate where you can kind of evaluate the purchase price, the maintenance cost, the cost of running the EV, insurance as well. And typically, on average, especially today compared to even 5 years ago, EVs for fleets can have a much lower TCO because you're not dealing with a lot of fuel costs, a lot of unvariable fuel costs as well. You just need to charge the vehicle. In terms of maintenance as well, you don't need to change a lot of fluids. Usually it's just the brake fluid and the wiper fluid. So there's a lot more routine repairs required as well. And that's probably the biggest cost for a lot of these fleets, the maintenance cost. The other one is battery cost. Batteries are significantly better compared to 5 or 6 years ago. You don't need to change them often. Even if you do, they're a lot cheaper now. Incentive tax as well, tax credits and other incentives as well, especially thanks to a lot of the government initiatives recently. I think that's really kind of helped driven the total cost of ownership down as well. So if you account for a lot of these fleet factors, a lot of the last mile fleets, especially in the US, they are electrifying, and you can see why.
Yeah, thank you. Curtis and Lizzie, you both mentioned
Sorry,
satellite.
Yeah, I wanted to add something here, because I
Okay.
think it's particularly for EVs. For them, and just recalling a conversation I had almost a decade ago with one of the top EV manufacturers, the data for them is so critical. Like, if you look at what EVs can do with data versus what you do with gas-powered vehicles here, they have like an extensive amount of testing that goes into the vehicle, obviously, before they ever roll it out. But once they roll it out, they're now collecting data across now millions of cars. And that data and millions of hours, billions of hours of data now comes back into the system, so that they have that feedback mechanism where they can update the vehicle, further optimize it in the field. Right? If you look at what they do, and they're always connected, is super important to them to get the data, and then also to push updates that optimize the vehicle for better performance of the battery and lowering that total cost of ownership.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I have seen route optimization players kind of accounting for things like wind elevation as well for EVs. So yeah, we have 100%, Curtis.
Yep.
Thank you. I had a question about satellite, which Curtis, you and Lizzie both mentioned. Satellite seems a little bit of an odd fit when you start talking about some of these higher bandwidth applications and the cost issues. How do fleet managers who want to stay connected with their vehicles when they're outside of cellular coverage range integrate satellite connectivity to stay in touch with the vehicle, but somehow manage that maybe they can't send that much data and their latency issues are going to be obviously increased?
Lizzie, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's been a big conversation in any satellite use case in the IoT world, whether it's fleet management or not, is kind of like managing expectations. So knowing that the latency will be different, will be longer, and knowing that the cost will also be higher, and trying to triangulate which use case can kind of withstand both of those things. So I think really speaking with your connectivity provider and your other IoT solution providers, knowing which use case will necessitate this satellite fallback, but which use case can also not require super low latencies. Or so I think really trying to understand, I want to keep in touch with this information in my fleet, but knowing that it'll be infrequent and maybe a bit costly. So trying to, with that information, knowing which use cases are worth that, worth those differences, I would say.
Okay.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think I'll say dots on the map are still the most used use case in IoT, right? Where are my vehicles? Where are my assets? There. This is where satellite plays today. The latency is 1 to 2 seconds is acceptable for knowing where my device is there. Adhish mentioned compliance. When you look at some of the compliance things here, we're saying, look, I need to have this device tracked every single minute or every 10 minutes minimum. And if you have coverage gaps from cellular, that's a use case where satellite absolutely comes into play. And obviously the key thing here with NB-IoT over satellite is now we have a single module. We don't have to have dual modules that come into place. So it reduces the BOM for customers there, and they can unify. Even though the satellite piece is slightly more, not slightly, it's significantly more expensive than cellular. Those use cases really come into play, so that we can always see the dots on the map. Those applications are coming, Sarah. I mean, like, I think we're seeing uptake on our side of proof of concepts that are going, devices that are getting deployed now. I think it's right around the corner. We will likely see in the long term, depending on the adoption of NB-IoT over satellite. I think the next version is like, how do we make that more available for lower latency there with satellite applications there, where we can do, or maybe not lower latency, but higher data usage devices there. That will be the next phase. But I think this first crawl phase is going to be massive because we mentioned earlier the stolen vehicles here, 1 million stolen vehicles. Well, if that vehicle is out of cellular coverage and it's stolen, you want to know, you'll pay 50% extra for satellite to know where that vehicle is.
Interesting. Thinking about maybe there's an opportunity there for AI in the vehicle to kind of, maybe when they hit satellite, you still get your dot on a map, but maybe you're storing and forwarding and processing other systems information for when you get back into cellular coverage. Adhish, you had mentioned AI in the vehicle, and what kind of applications are you seeing that are leveraging artificial intelligence in terms of automotive or fleet?
Yeah, so I think the lowest hanging fruit is really prognostics and engine diagnostics, kind of really looking into the specifics of an engine or a tire through sensor fusion, through tagging them throughout for real-time analytics, and kind of anticipating any potential breakdown, knowing when to take the vehicle to maintenance. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit that we're seeing. The other one would definitely be something I talked about a few minutes before as well, collecting more dashcam annotations and running AI on the edge for better driver behavior monitoring and really identifying what exactly is the driver doing. Are they having any problems or not? In the future, we'll definitely see a lot of Gen AI based use cases as well. They are starting to kind of come about. A lot of hyperscalers are definitely talking about it because they are hosting a lot of telematics as well as TMS data. So just identifying things like, who's my best performing driver? What's my vehicle that requires maintenance the most? Like, those are some of the really simple questions you can ask, and Gen AI can basically scour through a lot of the amounts of data that's around with the telematic sensors, and you really answer the questions for the fleet managers. So I think those are the main 3 use cases that we're seeing the most of, that comes to my mind when we're talking about AI based use cases.
Yeah, so when you talked about AI and using generative AI to identify who's your best driver, do you see generative AI actually being applied at the edge?
Not so much. I think that would mostly be through TMS platforms or any fleet management platforms, or even telematics providers. AI on the edge would mostly refer to sensor fusion technologies when you're really looking into engine diagnostics or prognostics capabilities or driver behavior monitoring. I think those are the main ones for AI on the edge. Also, condition-based monitoring, kind of looking into refrigerated trucks and seeing what's exactly happening with the perishable, what's their humidity or their temperature like when you're transporting a food product from point A to point B.
And there's another question about AI at the edge. Is unreliable connectivity also a driver for AI at the edge in terms of systems optimization?
I think maybe, I do think it would ameliorate some of the need to have that instant connectivity if the device itself could do that sort of processing. I think, like Adhish said, it would be, there are probably cost concerns with that. Right now, especially as different high throughput networks become more available, it seems like that that connectivity and hyper reliable connectivity is on its way. So I think maybe that would be the just having a better and more advanced connectivity solution might be something that people would lean towards rather than buying more expensive devices themselves that can do more edge processing. That's what I think I would see in the market.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience? If you're shy and you have a question you want answered, but you don't want to be called out on the webinar here, please send your questions along and we will make sure we get you an answer. But thank you all for joining us, and thanks to all of our panelists. A really excellent session, and looking forward to some good follow-up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.